Discrimination laws can be confusing, and interviewers sometimes find themselves surprised at what questions can be considered discriminatory. With time and effort, however, interviewers can get the information needed for decision-making without violating the law. The following guidelines on appropriate interview questions can reduce your risk of discrimination claims and ensure that you ask the best possible questions in your next interview process. It's important to understand what laws impact the interview process. First, Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 prohibits discrimination based on race, sex, color, national origin, and religion. The Age Discrimination in Employment Act, or ADEA, prohibits questions about a person's age. The Americans with Disabilities Act, or ADA, protects qualified individuals with disabilities from discrimination in employment. The Immigration Reform and Control Act, or IRCA, makes it illegal for employers to discriminate based on an individual's citizenship or immigration status. The National Labor Relations Act, or NLRA, prohibits questions that reasonably tend to restrain, coerce, or interfere with the rights guaranteed by the Act. The Uniformed Service Employment and Reemployment Act, or USERRA, USERRA, prohibits an employer from engaging in acts of discrimination against past or present members of uniformed services. Let's take a look at how each of these laws apply in specific situations of questions you might ask in your interview process. First, let's consider age. We need to be sure to phrase each interview question so that it does not imply discrimination. The law we're talking about here is primarily the Age Discrimination in Employment Act, or ADEA. Often, employers give candidates the impression that they're making an employment decision based on age, when in fact they need to establish that the candidate is old enough to do the job. For example, there are many jobs that minors are not allowed to perform, such as serving alcohol or using bladed equipment. Be sure to phrase each interview question so that it does not imply age discrimination. So, instead of asking, "When did you graduate?" or "When do you intend to retire?" instead ask, "Are you old enough to do this type of work?" or "Can you supply transcripts of your education?" Now let's look at disabilities, covered primarily by the Americans with Disabilities Act, or ADA. In an interview, employers should avoid medical and disability-related inquiries. Employers can make further medical and disability-related inquiries after a job has been offered. It's common, for example, for employers to require workers to submit to physical examinations post-offer pre-employment. These types of inquiries should be made under a uniformly applied policy and not aimed at specific individuals who are suspected of having medical problems or disabilities. So, in your interview questions, instead of asking, "Do you have a disability?" "Have you ever filed a workers' compensation claim?" or "Do you have a history of drug or alcohol abuse?" instead ask, "Can you do the duties listed on the job description, with or without reasonable accommodation?" If a worker has an obvious disability or reviews a hidden disability, you may want to ask the person to describe or demonstrate how that applicant could perform the job duties. Let's consider religion. Primarily covered under Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, employers need to limit our questions about outside activities to those that are relevant to the job. Asking about volunteer work or memberships may elicit information you don't want, such as religious or political work. So, instead of asking, "What outside activities do you participate in?" instead ask, "What professional associations are you a member of?" Now let's look at sex, or marital status. Primarily covered by Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, or the Pregnancy Discrimination Act, and state laws on discrimination based on marital status, assumptions about traditional family roles can adversely impact women's employment opportunities. It's therefore best to avoid family-related questions for both sexes. In this case, instead of asking, "Are you married?" "When do you plan to start a family?" or "Do you have children?" instead ask, "Are you available to travel frequently?" "Can you work overtime with no notice?" "Can you work evenings and weekends?" When we check references or do a background check, are there other names we should look under? Citizenship, primarily covered by Title VII and the IRCA, prohibits discrimination about the anticipation of a worker's eligibility for work in the United States. Interview questions must avoid discrimination based on an individual's citizenship or immigration status. Avoid these questions. Are you a citizen of the U.S.? What country are you from? Where's your accent from? What nationality is your last name? Or when does your visa expire? Instead, we have to ask, if you are hired, are you able to provide documentation to prove that you're eligible to work in the U.S.? This is in accordance with the IRCA's I-9 form requirements to verify employment eligibility. Members of the uniformed service or military members are covered by UERSA or the ADA. Interview questions should avoid discrimination against past and present members of the uniformed services. Instead of asking, please provide the status of your military discharge, or will you miss work to perform military service, ask, what experience did you gain in the uniformed service that's relevant to the job that you would be doing? Finally, let's turn to arrest records and criminal convictions. The Equal Employment Opportunity Commission approved guidance on employer use of background checks. While background checks are encouraged, following a job offer, interview questions should steer clear of criminal records. So, instead of asking, have you ever been arrested? Ask, have you ever been convicted of a felony? You must qualify this question by stating that a conviction will not automatically disqualify a candidate. As a matter of fact, it might be good advice to simply avoid questioning on criminal activity or criminal convictions until a job offer is made and a background check can be conducted.